The Railroads, Chapter 5, Section 2. Discussion of a Transcontinental Railroad project began in 1849 with the discovery of gold in California. Sectional conflicts prevented Congress from beginning the project. These conflicts were based over whether or not the route should be a northern route or a southern route. During the Civil War, the North took advantage of the fact that southern states were out of Congress to pass the Pacific Railway Act of 1862. This provided for a northern route for the railway. Two companies were created to complete the project. The Union Pacific would build westward from Omaha, Nebraska, while the Central Pacific would build eastward from Sacramento, California. This is the route that the Transcontinental Railroad would take. The Union Pacific, which began in Omaha, Nebraska, used primarily Irish immigrants as workers, although there were also Germans, Mexicans, English, and other immigrants in the working groups as well. The Union Pacific laid 1,086 miles of track. The workers for the Union Pacific were paid relatively well. They received between $40 and $60 per month for their work and were also given their meals for free. The work was difficult and dangerous, as they had to deal with blizzards and the heat of the American prairie. The Central Pacific used primarily Chinese immigrants to build the rail. They laid 689 miles of track. However, the track that they laid was much more difficult because they were using explosives to tunnel through mountains. They were also forced to tunnel through snowdrifts. Chinese workers were discriminated against. They were paid only $35 per month, and the Central Pacific refused to provide them with food, claiming that they did not understand the diet of the Chinese immigrants. Work for both of these groups was extremely dangerous. In 1888 alone, more than 2,000 workers were killed, with an additional 20,000 workers injured. The working conditions of the Chinese were far worse than those of their white counterparts. They were forced to live in camps, and at times whole camps would be buried in avalanches, where they would be abandoned and new groups of workers brought in. The railroad was primarily paid for through aid from the federal government. The railroads were given long-term loans of $16,000 for every mile of track laid on flat land, up to $48,000 for every mile of track laid through the mountains. The railroads also received huge land grants. They received about an average of 6,400 acres, or 10 square miles of land per mile of track that they laid within state territory. They received 20 square miles per mile of track in the territories. This land would become extremely valuable because of its proximity to the rail line and the ease of transit. Generally, the railroads would use this land as collateral to secure further loans, and was also often sold for cash. The Transcontinental Railroad was completed in 1869. The two lines met in Promontory Point, Utah. In 1860, there were about 30,000 miles of track in the United States. By 1890, there were 166,000 miles of track in the United States. It was about 1/3 of the total railroad in the world. The federal government supported three further transcontinental rail lines: the Southern Pacific, the Northern Pacific, the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe. There was a fourth rail line called the Great Northern that was built without government help. Prior to the construction of the railroads, each city operated on its own time. Generally, they determined this by the position of the sun. This caused several problems for the railroads because with each city operating on different times, it was very difficult for the railroad to schedule trains. This led to accidents. It also led to people being late and missing trains altogether. To solve this problem, C.F. Dowd suggested creating a system of 24 time zones that would cover the entire world. There would be 4 of these time zones in the United States. In 1884, the plan for time zones was accepted by Congress, and there was also a worldwide conference that set the international time zones. As it turned out, most railroad owners did not make that much money from running their railroads. As a matter of fact, very few of them actually turned a profit. They made the vast majority of their money from the land grants that they received from the United States. They often bribed officials to get more land, and some opportunists like Jay Gould are going to manipulate the price of stock of the railroads in order to make a fortune. Union Pacific stockholders formed a construction company called Credit Mobilier. They would charge the company 3 times the cost to lay track, and they would pocket the difference. When some congressmen heard of this, Credit Mobilier Company paid them off by giving them shares in the company. Later, there was an investigation that exposed this scandal. The officers pocketed $23 million in stock, bonds, and cash. Even though public officials were exposed, they were not forced to give back the money. As I stated earlier, there was only one Transcontinental Railroad that did not take help from the government. The Great Northern Line, run by James J. Hill, used good business strategies to make money instead of defrauding the national government.